So I want to introduce our latest panel up to who just joined the stage here in just a minute. We're going to be talking about getting your fair share of attention and more. This session is really about identifying the tools and mechanisms to garner support on an ongoing basis. We talked about some of the tools, some of the programmatic elements, some of the support elements that you need to ensure success of launch into a new market or the launch of a new product. Now we're going to start really talking about those tools and those support mechanisms in a more robust, ongoing way, and the full range of options you have as a supplier to offer your distributor to invoke that confidence, to evoke that sense of continued commitment and reinforcement. So let's introduce. Well, we have Mike here, who was such a lovely contributor to the last session. We wanted him to continue to share some insights at this deeper level. I'd also like to introduce Dennis Krebs. He is a partner of Quintessential Wines. Dennis provides a wealth of knowledge here on this topic. He's been in the business, has run his family-owned distribution business in California, brokers throughout the rest of the US. He handles domestic and international business. He understands what it takes at the distribution, the retail, and the consumer level to ensure that continued support and confidence at all levels. He partners with and sells more than 30 brands to a variety of different markets. So we're glad to have you here, Dennis. Thank you. And then Charlie Plummer is the director of sales for Paul Hobbs Wines. Another guy who has just come through the ranks and understands the dynamic deeply of launching a new market, launching a new brand. He was responsible for the launch of Kona in its early days. He's worked with large suppliers, large brands. He ran Southern California for Beam Wine Estates, national sales director for Maryvale, and now running national sales for Paul Hobbs. So a great range of experiences. These guys come with a wealth of knowledge in terms of what works and what doesn't. So this session, what I want to do is just start off by talking about this term incentives. I've seen some questions, and if you don't mind, can we jump over to the Slido? Thank you. There's a number of questions about this idea of incentives, and let's just get the record straight. Are incentives still relevant? Give us your thoughts.
Incentives back in the old days, 15, 20 years ago, were very relevant. It was the way you got up in front of a sales force, you made a big difference with your presentation, you were shocking, you were entertaining, you left the room them loving you, and you left with an exciting incentive that you in turn, recap 30 or 60 days later. That was the way things were done. Wholesalers have gotten so big now, they don't even have time for you to get up in front of them and show them the money that you're going to spend to help sell the product that you're providing them. Incentives, in my mind and with our company, are a much, much, much smaller piece of what we do to drive our business. And when I say incentives, I say distributor incentives, sales rep incentives, manager incentives. We focus a lot more of our attention on consumer incentives, trade incentives to work the pull through to make that sale easier. But I think the old days of I'm going to pay $10 a placement and $25 a case and reward for the most placements in the month, they're not effective anymore. And if we do those things, we're just kind of checking the box to say we put a plan in place and we feel like we've done our job, and it's not going to work 99 times out of 100.
Yeah, I would agree. Over the course of the larger wholesalers, you're going to find that you run an incentive program for any given duration, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and you've got 50 other wineries doing the exact same thing. So what kind of impact are you truly going to have with writing an incentive for a pod drive or a volume drive? The sales reps will filter through these incentives and throw out the ones they can't make, and the ones that are slam dunk, that's what they're going to get, and they're going to get paid for not really growing your business or doing what you want. You've heard it earlier, and I love this format because there's so much building upon building, but it's having a strategy, a really good channel strategy. And we talk about, and I don't want to gloss over incentives, but having a really good channel strategy is much more important than just throwing anything at the wall to try to get some interest from a sales organization that you may see twice a year. That's not a way to ingratiate yourself. It's not a way to carry the flag into the marketplace. It's coming with a really good channel strategy, and channel really is on-premise, sub-development of that on-premise channel or off-premise and sub-development of that off-premise channel. If you have a good strategy, then maybe something more focused, whether it's a launch plan or a dollar plan or whatever it is, but apply your resources more accordingly and more strategically than just throwing a generic incentive out there. One more point on this, if you do an incentive, for whatever reason, make it visceral. Make it something that's tangible for them. I mean, money's always king. They always say cash is king. We've been saying that for a while, but give them some kind of experience or something. You got to understand your wholesaler and what really motivates them. If you are going to do that, then make it impactful. Otherwise, you're just another winery doing another dollar incentive on the table.
Yeah, and I got to say that in doing hook and ladder, we did some great street level incentives, and I think I mentioned that earlier. But if you can work with your distributors to set these up, just like you're working with your distributor to do the product, you should work with your distributor on what launch will be effective, and one size does not fit all. So if something is particularly effective in one market, doesn't mean that it translates it to the other markets. So you do really have to do your homework. And this is another reason why you don't want to go with a 50-state strategy. You want to start small, 3, 5, build up from there, so you can really get these things so that they become, if they're successful, you can run them again with that distributor. Now's the time of year. Bogle has this great thing. They have Petite Syrah Week. P.S. I Love You, I think, was the last campaign they did. But it's Bogle Petite Syrah Week, and they sell like 80% of all their Petite Syrah that week. It's a huge national incentive. It's really different. So you really have to think out of the box. And as you guys were saying, just throwing $10 at or $25 for a point of distribution, just totally not effective.
If I could just add, I think that's fantastic, exactly what you said. If you have a focus period, let's call it a focus period, not an incentive program,
Right.
and you focus on a period that's going to allow your wholesaler to focus with you, it's part of that process, right? And I think going back, you have to have a really good process and rhythm and cadence with your wholesaler, because you're kind of training your wholesaler to understand you as a company, as a winery, what's important to you. So having a process and by which you program the wholesaler or an account at the account level is vastly important, because what you do want is to find one that's really successful, whether it's a P.S. I Love You, or whether it's a Chardonnay focus program for the week, or it's varietally, whatever it might be, but you want it to be evergreen. You want it to be duplicable. And you'll go through tons of trials and tribulations and mistakes and money and like, oh my God, this never works. And then you find one that works, and then you duplicate that, because then your sales organization is trained to know, hey, I've got that cool program coming up. I can bank on that, or I'm going to plan on that, or I'm going to plan activities around that. And then you apply resources to that, whether it's manpower, hopefully not too much dollars, but manpower to come in and support those activations in marketplace. So then now you have consumer events, you have trade education, things of that nature. So there really is a more sophisticated way to plan your focus periods versus incentives. Just straight incentives, I think we all agree, don't really work.
Can you, and Charlie, you started on this, you started down this path. I'd love for you all to elaborate as much as you're able, maybe specific examples of, if you have a program period or a focus period, what are the elements of that? Maybe feet on the street, street level incentives, education. Can you share a little bit more about sort of the mental checklist that these folks should be thinking about in terms of what goes into a focus period that you need to provide as a supplier?
This is about the longest question you could possibly ask.
I'm sorry. And you volunteered to answer it.
I'm just like,
Thank you.
The steps that go into, and for our team, we have a checklist for programming, and it's maybe 2.5 pages long, and it's planning inventory out. For us, sometimes it's 120 days, 90 days out. For domestic producers, we may be talking closer to 60, but you're planning your inventory needs for your program 60 days before the program launches. So you've written that program at least 90 days before the program launches, so you can plan inventory. And the inventory is the first indication that your distributor has bought in on the program. If they agree to the goals that you've set and agree to split, maybe it's splitting the money with you, they're all hyped up, and you say, okay, we're going to do this amount of cases. We need to place the order for the program to start. And that doesn't happen, there's your first indication that it's been some lip service. But if they order it, now you're committed, they're committed, and everybody starts to get on board. But first, you set the meeting, you manage the inventory, you set the kickoff meeting. So you can't assume that the distributor is going to kick it off for you properly, because they'll get a book of incentives that'll look like this. And those sales reps will not see all of them. They may get paid on a bunch of them that they never even knew were in place. So you have to kick it off. You have to give them all the tools. You have to educate them. You have to show them how to sell. You have to show them some of the successes you've experienced. And you've also got to plan the recap. And this is, for me, is one of the absolute biggest things. You want to make it fun. An example I did, seems like a long time ago, is we did a Blitz, and we did the kickoffs, and we planned everything, but we were tracking the Blitz every day, and at the end of the week, we wanted every sales rep in the room to sell at least one case of the product, and we were going to track them on a little spreadsheet. And a 0, it looks like a donut. So I brought a paper bag full of bagels because they were nice and loud, and I shook it, and I sat it on the table, and I made the presentation, and I don't think they were listening to me. They were looking at that bag, going, what is in there? So as we finished up the recap, I held it up and I said, you know, this represents a bag of donuts, and I don't want anybody to turn in a donut. Whatever help you need, whatever assistance you need, we've got a team here to help you, but let's make sure everybody in the room commits to selling at least one case in their market. I wasn't ever going to embarrass anybody during the recap and give them that donuts, but it was a fun way to do it, and we joked all week that, oh, you're going to, you know, who do you think's going to win the donut? Who, you know, who's going to have that recognition at the sales meeting? Of course, you never ever pass it out, but you do a recap at the end of the program, whether it's a week long or a month long or 60 days, to recognize success and to thank people that went kind of over and above. So there's a lot of pieces to it. And then there's one thing always to consider with incentives is you'll have a percentage of your salespeople in the room that are sales consultants, and they take care of their accounts, and they get the right wines in front of the right accounts, and they really own them, and they do a great job. And you'll have another percentage that they're just trying to get through, and they're trying to figure it out, and they're trying to do the best they can. Everybody has the same challenges. You'll have a percentage of those salespeople that they just play the incentive game, and they've got certain slots on a retail shelf, and they've got certain slots on a wine list that they rotate every month with whatever's on incentives, and that just kills your incentive. He's like, well, I paid $25 for that placement, but it's going to get pulled out next month for his next $25 incentive. So, you know, you need to have, the last piece of it is you need to have personal relationships with the sales reps, so it becomes more personal and less monetary.
Yeah, I think incentives or programming periods, again, we talked about recently, just earlier, just having a process by which you do it. You know, have a plan and a strategy, and that could include the buy-in from your wholesaler. You've got to make sure you have the right plan in place. Then you put the strategy in place to say, hey, these are the channels we want to execute this against, and then what are the tactics we're going to use in order to execute this, right? And your tactics could be funding, it could be manpower, it could be whatever it is, and then you have to execute. And that's the really hard part, is execution. As Dennis was saying, there are guys they'll milk the system, and they'll just execute against incentives. And I've seen large wholesalers where reps or managers make 50% of their income based just on incentives alone. So, you know, having a very fair and equitable program or focus period is one thing, but making sure it's qualitative is really, really hard to do. But, you know, being able to navigate that and poke holes in your program, find the loopholes. I mean, I think wholesalers are really, I love wholesalers, are good at accepting things. But again, I think this comes back to what we said earlier. Be organized, right? Come with a plan. Simplify it. The more convoluted and crazy your plan is, the harder it is for the sales team to execute it. Again, if they've got 50 other wineries doing the same thing, your simplicity of your programming by channel is going to make it that much easier for you to be successful, right? And then be transparent. Set your goals. Be transparent. You have to be transparent, and your wholesaler has to align with you. If you're going to make a statement like, I need to achieve, I was having this conversation with someone at lunch, hey, I want to sell 100 cases in Wisconsin. Well, that's very nebulous, right? But I want to sell 60 cases in on-premise and 40 cases in off-premise, and this is how we want to do that by these types of accounts. Someone said it earlier, find a channel that you're good in and run with it. Focus your energy and attention there. I think that's really the main thing I would say when it comes to focus periods and incentives.
And I just wanted to briefly clarify, in case you don't know what a blitz is, it's when it's all hands on deck and you've got 5 or 6 staff members, as many as you can muster from the winery, and you go invade a city or a state, if it's a small state, and you just see everybody while you're there, and you work with every rep, and you get in deep. That is a blitz. And I think I could still do a blitz. I think I have a few good years left, but it's a lot of work. So you get up first thing in the morning, you do your office stuff, you're running all day long, you have your first appointment, maybe it's getting picked up at 9 or 10 o'clock, and you go have a lunch with a whole bunch of people, and then after you see more accounts, then you go to take some people out to cocktails. Maybe you do a winemaker dinner that night, and it's 4 or 5 days of that. So there's nothing beats that. Get into a market, and especially if you're in a launch phase, it's necessary.
Mike, I want to just jump in there. What is expected of, how do you prep your team when you're sending people into market for a Blitz? What is most important for them to be able to do when in market? And then part B to that is, do you focus on accounts and areas of strength, or do you focus on areas of opportunity?
Yeah, it's some combination of that, but I can't emphasize enough, you have to plan it. You have to plan it with your distributor. Yep. Doing the Blitz part, that's just the execution. That's the part where you get to be, a rock star, and you entertain people, and you really get them behind the product, and they all know what the idea is and everything. But you must plan that out, as you were saying. It's got to be planned out 60 days before, so you have enough inventory. The last thing you want to do is go do a Blitz and run out of product. It's terrible. And I've done that occasionally. We oversold. We got out there, and couple pallets would move, and we'd have a truck on the way with more product. So planning, you guys can't emphasize it enough.
One thing I didn't touch on is you're running. If you want to really be successful, you also have to understand what's going on within the distributor at the time. What are their priorities? Who are their priorities within their portfolio, and how do those compete with yours? Is it some big corporations into fiscal? If it is, you're banging your head against the wall, because they're talking to their managers every night about the numbers they have to make. So you have to understand their challenges and what their priorities are each month, and work out the time periods too. So you really have to understand their business very, very well to program effectively, or ask the questions to your brand manager. If you ask, they'll tell you. Most of the time they're not going to say, if you come to them with a program and say, here's what we want to do, we want to get all this done, and we want to do it in this month. They're not going to say, we have bigger priorities that month than you, we can't focus on it, you're not going to get any attention. Most of the time they're not going to tell you, but if you ask the questions, they'll answer them.
Great. You guys mentioned while we were prepping for this session the idea of, and these are some pretty tactical solutions, but I think very important. What can you pay for, and what can you sort of provide as a gimme, like make sure that all their samples are paid for, right? Like, what are some of the other pretty granular tactical tools that distributors don't necessarily demand, but when you do it, it sets you apart?
Sure. I think for us as a company right now, we're a medium-sized company. We're scaling, which is really good for some of our brands, but the value we bring is our farming. Our farming philosophies and what we do. And I hope nobody from Constellation is here. We joke that hey, if you really want to know how to open a bottle of wine 6 different ways, the Constellation guys can teach you that. I'm sorry, I'm joking. If you want to talk to us about farming and viticulture and nematodes and nutrients and things like that, then let's take a higher level of education out to the trade. And so, understanding where you're at as a winery, whether you're a principal and a sole person running the operation, or you have multiple people to do blitzes or focus periods, when you come to a market and you understand your value to that wholesaler, ours is education. It's education internally for their wholesaler on specific characteristics or varieties or the production methodologies or the vineyard viticultural cycle. That's what we bring to a wholesaler education, and that's what we also bring to trade. So having value coming to a market, not simply just to blitz the market, but bringing a sense of education, because when you touch the wholesalers, they have a higher sense of purpose and education. Everybody wants to learn more and be able to rattle that off to their accounts. But when you take that to the trade and you spend the time with, and it doesn't have to be a 30-person audience, it could be a 5-person SOM group, and you sit down and you have a really open dialogue about farming practices or viticulture or production, it means so much more, and it's so much more impactful than just going out and hoping that the 10 minutes you get at a GSM, a general sales meeting, is going to be impactful enough, because you're just one of 10 more that have got on stage before you,
Adding to that a little bit, that's exactly it, is you have to set yourself apart. You have to give the salespeople tools that make their job easier. It's education, maybe it's soil samples, it's wait staff incentives, it's floor staff incentives. What makes, everybody's got a really great presentation. Our little niche is we promote family, so we tell the family story and we tell the history and the generational story, which sets us apart from most of our competition on a national basis. But when you get down to the account, you can give them all those great stories, but you've got to give them tools to help sell the wine. And whether it's an interesting wait staff incentive, like a big bottle, or a signed poster, or it's what do they call them? Mystery shoppers. Fun ways of doing things that'll make sure your wine pulls through. Because the biggest challenge a sales rep has and the account has is they want to make sure the wine sells. One of our biggest jobs is, first it's to get it in, but that's the easy part. It's to make sure it sells through, it pulls through, and you get that second order. So as we're talking incentives and programming dollars, more of the thought and more of the money should be focused on how do we make sure the wine pulls. And Jeff mentioned in the last group, which is something that we've played with a little bit, which is posting, the Instagram advertising ahead of going into a market. We've never done that. We've gotten big distributions in an area and advertised very, very heavily because of those distributions, and nobody can understand why sales have gone through the roof. We're like, it's just a good brand. But focus on the consumer pull, because that's everybody's challenge. It's your challenge. It's your wholesaler's challenge. It's your retailer's challenge. They're being challenged right now to be profitable enough. It's the restaurateur. So you can do more by helping the pull through and helping the turns.
Yeah, I'm glad Dennis mentioned this. Large formats, build that into your production forecast. Those are absolutely necessary in the marketplace for wholesaler, more particularly for the account, whether it's retail or on-premise. Use those large formats. They look really great on Instagram too, right? So if you're going to couple that with social media, large formats, I can't tell you how much large formats we utilize in the marketplace as a way to help pull or help create additional sales for ourselves.
Is there anything else while we're on this topic of wait staff incentives and floor staff incentives, anything else? You talked about large format bottles, you talked about the mystery shopper. Can you elaborate a little bit on those, just for the entertainment of the audience, on sort of what some of those things are and why they're so helpful?
Don't forget the wine keys. They're cheap, and wait staff will fight over them. So go ahead and have your logo on a wine key and pass it out. Don't forget that part.
I think I'm stealing all the thunder here. So when we were talking big bottles, you run a wait staff incentive, and I did one in Chicago years ago. It was a simple, I think, a Napa Chardonnay and Napa Cab, and what server that week sold the most bottles won this big bottle. And us in the industry, we don't think it's a big deal. And it was a sign, of course. We want to get the winemaker, the homemaker to sign it, and if we can personalize it, it's even better. But I learned that the server that won the contest put it on their mantle and had their track lighting going towards the bottom. I mean, it was a big deal. And it wasn't just about selling the wine into that account and getting the pull through. Is that server is also the opinion leader of their group of friends. So when they get together, somebody's looking for a wine recommendation, they're calling her and saying, hey, what do you like, or what should I try? Or that's how you can slowly build a brand. So the big bottles go a lot farther than you think, and they're good for image. Mystery shopper, for those of you who don't understand it or aren't familiar with it, it's just you sell a placement into an account and you do a kickoff meeting with the staff, and it could be floor staff or it could be a restaurant, and you tell them somebody's going to come in here in the next 2 days and they're going to be looking for something, and if you sell them one of these bottles, they're going to give you $100 or $500, and it all depends on what's legal in a particular market. But that's the kind of thing that gets people really excited, because there's an opportunity to make a big splash. It's unique, it's creative, and it engages the servers or the floor staff people. And you can use a lot of different things. One of the great ideas is to use something that's unique and personal to you, to your brand, to your winery, something that sets yourself apart. What we're talking about is pretty generic, and it's not setting yourself so much apart. But you've got, if you live in the market and you've got a boat and you can offer somebody a cruise for the day for them and their friends, something unique that also works for them makes a big difference, and it sticks a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've seen wineries, from Italy ship in olive oil because they grow olives on their vineyards. I've seen other wineries locally that may have, Gravenstein apples that they want to pack up and send to a wholesaler as an incentive. I had a guy one of my guys in Chicago run an incentive in Nebraska for Chicago deep dish pizzas. I mean, just silly stuff like that. Find something that resonates. Again, understanding the wholesaler's motivation and what they need, or the account's motivation and what they need. That's really what it comes down to. But be unique.
There's a question here on Slido. What are the keys to building my own trade relationships and market to help my distributors sell? And do I need my own sales team on the supplier side? How much is enough? Mike, you talked about, blitzes and requires bodies. How do you all think about it?
Yeah, it depends on what your resources and what your goals are, of course. But that being said, you cannot do enough. Go open accounts for your distributor. They will love it. Make sure you got don't quote any pricing unless you know for sure what the pricing is, because you'll get in big trouble. But and if you quote a price that's wrong, you should pay for that. But the point is that you just can't do enough of that. So when you're in the market, make sure every moment you are selling the entire, what's the Alec Baldwin? Always be closing, right? You guys are too young to remember that movie. Okay.
This is kind of a line from, I think, the intergalactic viceroy that was up here earlier. The best and easiest way to get a distributor's attention is to create demand within their marketplace. And whether that's a retailer chain, or a restaurant chain, if their customers are asking for the wine, you've got the hook. You've shown demand. They know the profit's going to be there. In my mind, that's the best, easiest way to do it, and the most successful.
Yeah, I think we talk about creating brand ambassadors, whether it's the waitress at the restaurant who got your big bottle on their mantle. Hopefully she's a lifelong brand ambassador. We talk about doing the education at the wholesale level, and you've got 35 sales reps in the room. They're all kind of glazed over, but 3 of them, you see the light bulbs go off. You're not going to touch them all, but the ones you do touch, you want to continue to nurture that relationship. You want to foster that. For us, we task, I have a team, but we task our team with knowing their market as well as their wholesaler, meaning we have our own list of accounts that I need them to see. We need to build a relationship with these accounts if we deem them, whether they're Michelin or James Beard or Wine Spectator Grand, or simply just the guy that does a lot of business at a retail store. Our time's limited, right? You can't have 5,000 accounts that you're going to call in individually. So you have to narrow your universe down. One of the ways we've done this is we've identified what are prestige accounts for us. And prestige are Michelin, James Beard, Wine Spectator Grand, White Tablecloth. Those are your really aspirational accounts most times if you don't have a brand that's going to resonate with that Somm or whatever it might be. But you got to have them on there because that's your positioning. That's where you want to position your brands. Then you have your volumetric accounts, right? Whether it's on-premise or off-premise. And these are guys who just love your brand anyways, and they're going to be ambassadors, they're going to promote it. You got to have that relationship. And then we look at that third category, which is these regional accounts. I think regional accounts are incredibly important. There's several regional retailers and several regional restaurant groups, whether they're 3-unit restaurant groups or 50-unit restaurant groups. If you can spend time and develop those relationships, I like the smaller guys because you can grow with them. Doing the onesie-twosie every day can be a drain, and it's a grind. And let your wholesaler do that if you tell a good story and do that. But if you're going to build an account list, or if you're lucky to have a team to build an account list, quantify it, make sure you have the parameters that work for your brands, identify it, nurture it, and build those relationships. I think everybody will say it's all about the relationships that's going to get your brand to be able to grow. And if you can scale it, then it's even better.
We've the top question here on Slido is, how can a small winery like ours attract distributors and make them want to represent our line? We've been talking about a lot of that throughout the day, right? But I think what's interesting about, to elaborate and go a little bit deeper, probably as our last question, is you all have talked about distributor programming, incentives, trade incentives, and tools and support, and you've hit on this consumer piece. Can you share a little bit about maybe even just some success stories or examples in your history of brands that maybe they weren't big, but they did something from a consumer pull standpoint that really hit the mark and left a lasting impression that garnered excitement?
So it's pretty nuts and bolts, but we just opened up Florida for one of our smaller Sonoma County producers, and it was because I knew one of the salesmen that I'd worked with on other brands, and we have a very close personal relationship, and it was a warm market. And he said, "Would you guys?" I didn't even think of it. He said, "Do you have any brands that maybe we should be looking at?" I went, Well, maybe this one because she's really cool and she'll come to the market a whole bunch. So we opened it up. She went to her mom has a place there, so she went there. She had other things she did while she was there in Florida, but she went down there and she worked there for the first 4 months. She went down there once a month. Those people will never forget that. We've been selling a couple pallets a month ever since that. It's her biggest wholesaler now.
I have a pretty good example to this, and you were talking about driving the consumer business. About 12 years or so ago, we went to launch a brand that was very successful in its home country, didn't exist in the U.S. And we did what we're all talking about here. We came to our distributors with plans and programs and incentives and long-term plans and short-term plans, and I'd say 45 out of 50 said, there's no way. It's absolutely, positively not going to work. It's so different from what the rest of the industry is doing. It's not going to happen. Forget it. Not to take no for an answer is we said, well, you bring it in, we'll make sure it sells. The distributor doesn't believe in it, but if we can get in front of the consumer, we're going to invest there and we're going to make sure it works. So, when I talk about blitzes, it wasn't a trade blitz, it was a consumer blitz. Our guys, our team, every one of us probably did a minimum of 6 tastings a month. Most Friday, Saturdays, Thursday nights, Friday, Saturdays were tastings with consumers, whether it was in a retailer, a restaurant tour, any kind of fair, music event, anywhere where we could touch the consumer and tell them the story. We built it and we built it and we built it. And it took forever, but it got to the point where retailers started saying, hey, customers keep asking me for this. So the question was, how can you affect the consumer with your programming? And we just believe we had a product that was unique, that if we could just get in the consumer's mouth and tell them the story, we could hook them. And it was a brand that didn't exist, and we grew it to 160, 170,000 cases of one type of wine in a category that at the time didn't exist. So we are all slaves to the consumer. When I say we, the producers, importers, marketers, distributors, the consumer's the boss, and if we can get our message to them, and the same programming dollars, whether it's driving incentives to the sales force or spending that same money touching the consumer, it's the net effect of what you're looking for. So for me, the consumer's the key. Is you've got to sell the consumer, and everything else falls along.
Yeah, I would add. We were fortunate. We launched a brand about 2 years ago. This Armenian label was really quite interesting, and before it even hit the market, we had sent it out to some media and we had sent it to Texom because we had a very clear path of who we wanted to identify with. And it's interesting when you launch an Armenian brand, you're thinking, well, I don't know how much the Armenian community actually drinks, but that we were way off base, right? We were like, well, that's not who the consumer is. It's the consumer that's looking for esoteric wines, looking for something unique, an indigenous great variety from an ancient world civilization, blah, blah, blah. But we had put it in the right hands and created a buzz in order to make sure that the influencer was on board with this so they could influence other people, thus the consumer. And we only brought in 500 cases of this wine, but we sold out in 6 months. It was great because of the way we positioned it. So again, when you're thinking about consumer pull and how do you touch the consumer, if you have a brand or a label or a variety that's unique enough where you can put it in front of the right influential audience that could then again duplicate or tell that story to the consumer, then now you've got an instant access to a consumer base. I love the small consumer dinners. We do a lot of those private, either with a retailer or even in-home, which is a whole DTC conversation, but those are incredibly effective, by the way. We touch consumers directly with in-home experiences, and that's one way we bolster both our wholesale and our DTC business.
One final question. We have a few more minutes. You hit on the idea of PR, and we talked about ratings earlier in the day. Any advice you have on getting some even local market buzz going with PR? Doesn't have to be ratings, can just be local media.
We're all looking at each other. PR is part of our overall plan. So when we work with a producer and they come work a market, our PR team will be sure and set them up with all the local wine writers, whether it's a blogger, whatever their capacity is. We are sure to put either the producer or the winemaker or the owner in front of the writer in that local market. So as we're working on distributions and kicking it off with the salespeople or trying to educate them, we also have writers in that area doing local things. The national PR discussion is something bigger and much more longer term. You submit wines and 6, 9, 12 months later they get rated. So you can't really plan the timing there. But on the local side, you definitely can. And then if you can get those local guys to visit your winery, to get that personal touch, to get a feel for who you are and who the producer, what you do differently than your competition, it helps a lot on the local market. The buzzword these days is influencers. Some of them are very, very effective. Some of them a little less so. But you certainly want to touch the right ones and get them telling your story.
It's great. Anything to add there, Mike?
Yeah, with a specific example with Hook and Ladder, what we did is we hired a PR guy. He wasn't very expensive. He did a lot of, his wife did the graphics. I mean, you can find local people who can really help you out, who know the wine business. And this guy was, keep in mind, this is like 2003, 2004. And there were a lot of wine bloggers, but no one was sending the wine bloggers samples. And this guy had a brilliant idea. Let's send them some samples. And guess what? That took off, and it took off in a national way and made finding distributors easier. It's more of a crowded field, and people do that now as a matter of course. But if you can find whatever that one thing is that no one else is doing in PR, that's the thing you need to do.
Yeah, I think this panel is about how do you gain more mind share with your wholesaler, and I think this segues into this as well too. We look at 4 elements when we go into a market: sales, because that's the lifeline of the winery, right? Then there's trade and wholesale education, which we talked a little bit about before. Consumer, touching the consumer experience, whether it's retail or restaurant, but that media piece. You've got to build a format and a process by which, when you go to a market, what are the elements you're going to touch when you go there? You can't simply just show up, talk to a wholesaler, see a few accounts, and leave. The spend's not worth it. So if you have a sales effort and a goal, if you have a wholesale and trade education goal, a consumer goal, and then a media piece, whether it's a local blogger or a local NPR thing, national media is hard to get. They're incredibly hard to get, but have a media plan and build that into your market visits, because I think if you touch all 4 of those elements, you'll have much more success bringing value to your wholesaler, knowing that they know that you're going to touch all 4 of these elements while you're in market, and it really brings value to your brand and to who you are as a company. Keep it authentic and genuine, I think, is what everybody would say in that sense.
Thanks, Charlie. That's actually a great segue into our session that we'll jump into after break. You guys have been really valuable in giving some pretty granular examples of what works, how to punch above your weight. I want to give a nice round of applause to Mike and Dennis and Charlie.